In today's video, I'm going to be breaking rolling bass lines down for you in simplistic terms. Feel free to skip around. I'll have timestamps for you guys, and let's get it rolling. First step in nailing the rolling bass like a pro will be to find the correct kick for this. Now, with kicks, there are a few things you want to look at. One of those will be the length of the kick. How long is the kick? How much real estate is it taking up in that 1/4 that you're setting the kick before the kick hits again? So for example, here, if we look at this kick is taking up about a little over half of this 1/4. Okay. Which means that if I want to execute a rolling bass, this kick might be a tad bit too long for what we're trying to do. Now, a couple of options you will have here is one, you can always use this fade out feature in Ableton by going to the top right of a sample and clicking and dragging to the left in order to shorten the kick more to make room for your rolling bass. Now, there is a big con for this because every kick is created differently. Some kicks, it goes straight to the low end, while other kicks take their sweet time getting to the low end. And this will dictate the characteristic of the kick. I've made a video, the last video I made, where I talk about how to process kicks, where I explain how kicks are made and how they essentially go from high pitch to low pitch to give you the sound of a kick. So if you want more information on that, more context, then make sure to check that one out. For now, I'm just going to go in and do this to the kick. But remember, this technique can backfire because you will end up with a kick that lacks low end if you don't do it to the right kick. Okay, so I'm going to do that to the kick, and I'm just going to duplicate that across, okay? But find a kick, hopefully from scratch in whatever sample source you are using in order to nail the rolling bass. So if it's short and sounds good, that is always the best, going to be the best. From there, rolling bass. Now, when it comes to the rolling bass, the first step will be to pick the synth of choice that you want to make the rolling bass line with. Every synth has a tone. Every synth will have strengths that it has. Every synth will have certain filters. And each of these little things will add to the sound of the rolling bass. Some people prefer the sound of analog bass lines, which other people might like more digital, like Serum 2, Repro, Arturia synths, etc. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using the Ableton Wavetable one. However, you know, you can use this and get something that sounds good, but just remember, other synths will give you access to different tones as well. This is like a very attention to detail part of creating rolling bass lines and making music. Okay, now the first one we're going to set up here will be a saw. So by default, when you open up the Wavetable, we're already going to have here basic shapes wavetable. And what I want to go do is go pick the saw waveform, which is going to be the bread and butter of sound design. This is the first wave everyone knows. It's a more anthemic one if you're making anthemic leads, if you want to make a rolling bass that sounds like everyone else, and this is the one to go with. The square is also a very popular choice, and we're going to be switching to that one throughout this tutorial as well. But for now, you want to pick the saw, okay? From there, now we're going to go into the filter. So the filter, very important. Okay, with bass lines, usually the holy grail of filters will be a 24 dB pole filter. And you can find the option here. Now, what's the difference between the 12 and the 24? The 24 cuts more highs out. It's a lot more strict. This is why it's considered the holy grail for bass lines, because it removes more of the high end. It allows for more of a dramatic shape as we start to use some of a synthesizer features, modulators in order to move it, so we get a little bit more bite out of it. The 12, while it can still work for bass lines, it allows more of a gradual cut. It allows more of the upper frequencies out, more of the and it allows more of that top part of the bass, which sometimes can work and sometimes can hinder a song, especially when it comes to mixing elements in it. So we're going to go with the 24. From there, as we go from the right to the left, you're going to see that we're going to cut those high frequencies out. Now here, where do I want to set this at? One rule of thumb for me will always be that I still want to hear the low end of this wave, okay, this rolling bass. So what I'm going to do right now, since we're not at the optimal range, I'm going to do click here, Command A, and I'm going to shift down here low end around here at 153. I might go a little bit more to around 104, even try 80, but around here I'm still having it. Now, this doesn't sound like a rolling bass, and the reason for that is that the Wavetable synth is set to poly mode right now, which means that I'm allowed to play more than one note, and also the amp envelope is not set up for a proper rolling bass line. So in order to fix that, I'm going to go over here to the voicing features of the Wavetable synth from Ableton, and I'm going to click on poly to turn it into mono. Okay, so now I can only play one note at a time, which when it comes to low end, you never want to be in poly, as when you have overlapping bass notes, it can start to phase out in very unwanted ways and you lose a lot of power. From there, the amp has this setting here, our attack, decay, sustain, and release. Now these are going to be the foundation, the dynamics of the bass, rolling bass we're going to create. So all of these are going to control the way the sound comes out, okay? So for example, the sustain, if I hold down a note, is the volume, which that note is going to be held at as long as I'm holding down the MIDI note. The release is when I let go, how long does it linger around for? Great for like creating polyphonic leads and leads that kind of sound very flowy. But for rolling bass line, we do not want release. In fact, the less we can do, the better. However, you don't also want to zero it out, because if you zero it out, you can produce a click-like sound at the tail end of the rolling bass, which is not desired. So we're going to set this somewhere around 3 milliseconds. From there, since this is the amp envelope, right, I'm going to leave my sustain up here, but the attack controls how long it takes for the note to reach max volume, max amplitude, and the decay controls how long it takes for us to go from that max volume down to the sustain volume. Okay? So this will become very useful as we create our rolling basses, because rolling bass lines are very dynamic, full sounds that are pop, 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 almost like gunshots going off on a track. But that's what makes them so energetic and so driving. Okay, so here with the amp, all I want to do is set my sustain down a bit to around 3 minus 3 dB. And I'm going to lower this decay down to here for now. The reason I don't want to go with the sustain all the way down to 0 is because you want to think about it like this. You need low end power coming from this rolling bass. If the sustain goes all the way down, you create a bleep, and you also create a bass that's going to lack low end. So we want to make sure we still have a bit of reduction on the sustain, right? Minus 3. And we want to make sure we're using the decay to control the punch, but we don't want to completely remove the sound, because then we run the risk of creating a very weak bass line. Now we're almost there. I know there's a lot of steps here, but all of these are the things that are going through my head as a sound designer as I create these sounds for producers to make banging techno music with. Next thing is now envelope 2. Okay, now this is the one that's really going to give us like 80% of the results, turn this into a massive rolling bass. For this one, right now, it does nothing. It's not routed to anything. This is what we would call a modulator, and this is what we're going to pretty much be routing to this frequency knob in order to open this up and close it to create the rolling bass sound that you love. So, again, we're going to put this frequency at 80. Envelope 2, I'm going to hit the matrix. In the matrix, you're going to find where all of your modulations are occurring. Now, remember, anytime you hear modulations, think knobs turning, values changing. What are envelopes for? To turn knobs for us. Okay, so envelope 2 is already here, as you can see. Filter 1 frequency is here. If I click resonance, that will pop up there. Frequency pop up there. Wavetable, you can see it goes there. So frequency, I'm going to route envelope 2 to it, and now I'm going to hit play and put a value in. Okay, now I'm going to set this somewhere where I think it sounds decent. But we still don't have a rolling bass. So the reason we're not getting the snap is because this is probably one of the most important parts, which is the envelope. So similar to the amp's controlling volume. So we talked about attack, decay, sustain, and release. For envelope 2, this is going to dictate how that filter is opening up and closing. So I'm going to lower down to my sustain all the way. The release will also come back down, and the decay, I'm going to move it to the left slowly. And as I do it, you're going to see the rolling bass come to life. Okay. And now we have a proper rolling bass. Now I can use my matrix and this filter frequency to go, well, I heard this Anima track, or I heard this Amelie Lenz track, and the bass sounded more open. all you have to do is move this more up to get more bite. And as you move it up, you go back to your mod source and you start playing with your envelope to dial it in. Okay. From there, I always want to check if I can go down one more octave. Way too low. So that we're good here. Now I'm going to switch the key because I like deeper bass lines. So the key you decide to pick, A, G, will matter. Usually lower keys like D minor produce grittier bass lines, while higher keys will produce more happy, friendly, subby ones. So let's go somewhere to E. Okay, now let's program this better. Okay. Now, if I'm hearing clicks and those are unwanted, then I want to check my envelopes. Maybe my release needs to be a little longer. My attack maybe at a 0.05. Okay, and then if I still am hearing clicks, then at that point, you might ask yourself, oh, that's just the synthesizer. Okay, and again, the sustain is very important. And I'm happy there. Okay, so we've made the first rolling bass. Now what we have to do is we have to sidechain the bass. A sidechain is just an effect that's gonna reduce the volume of the bass as something hits, whatever we decide it's gonna be. So in basic terms, if we have a utility where we control the volume, we have the kick. Kick has a lot of low end. When it comes to low end, you can't have multiple elements playing at the same time, because the thing that happens is that if you have a kick, let's say playing here and then the rolling bass, you always run the risk of canceling out your kick and bass. Okay, I'm going to use a compressor from Ableton. Command F, compressor. I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to click this arrow here, which activates the sidechain section. Hit external, source, main kick, wherever your kick's routed. From there, I'm going to bring down the threshold. I'm going to set it to peak mode. And I'm going to get some volume reduction on this bass. Okay. Now, if I were to show you a visual of what that is doing, I wish this was a lot more colorful. But the idea of it is when the kick hits, the volume of this rolling bass will duck. So this is why it's so important that you pick the right kick, because if this kick is really long, okay, now there are tricks to make it not cut or duck so much, lose volume so much. But remember, at the end of the day, this is a technique we're doing not for the effect of the pump, but more because when you play your song out, you want to make sure the track hits. If you've ever been to a rave or to a club and heard a techno track where it doesn't hit, you know that that is the worst thing that can possibly happen. And sadly, in today's age of Spotify and everyone releasing music, like I would say at least 50-60% of people have flawed bass lines, like straight up in their songs. They sound like, ugh, okay? Call it pride of ownership, but it's up to you whether you want to kind of nail that or not. The tool I use to kind of get this in order is a very cheap, inexpensive one called Kickstart, because what I can do is set it to audio. I can route sidechain of the kick. I can see the length of the kick and the low end, you know, the bass line here in gray. And I can sidechain perfectly so that they never touch. Now, if you can see, if we were to do this properly, I really have to cut a lot of the rolling bass out, right? So if in your head you want more of the rolling bass that is like you want to hear everything, you have two options. One, you want the long kick, so then you can use this band feature and allow anything above this frequency you're setting here, which I recommend usually between 150 to 300 hertz. Everything below this will get sidechain, and everything above it will be allowed through. And now we got a pretty good sidechain going. And the rolling bass. However, again, to me, whenever you do stuff like this, where you use bands and have crossover points, wherever that crossover point occurs, will always sound not optimal, okay? Not optimal because there needs to be a cut that occurs there in order for it to happen. So if you can avoid doing this, it will always be the more desired outcome. Okay, so here I've picked a different kick, which is a little bit shorter, right? You can see that if we look at the kick length compared to where the rolling bass starts, there is a bit of interaction that's going to occur, which can easily be solved with a proper sidechain. And I can still keep the roll of that bass. Okay, now the next thing is, where do you level the bass, right? And this is another hard thing about the rolling bass, because the rolling bass, if you decide to open up the filter a lot, sometimes you can get something very dynamicful here, where you have that grayish looking meter you can see right there, which is what we would call our peak, very high, and our RMS, which is actually going to be the one you want to look at for like leveling your low end, which is down here. It will have a big difference, which we call the crest factor, and you're sometimes going to have to level the bass really high up. But this will only happen if the rolling bass you have has been created where, again, I'm doing something drastic like sustain coming down like this. So that's why it's very important to have that high up. And if you're opening up your filter like really a lot, and your envelope 2, which controls that filter, is super snappy. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, again, just tailor it to how I want it to hear with everything we've learned. Like so. Where it sounds good. You know, you slowly breathe. Don't rush this section. Okay. Now the level, what I'm doing is I'm looking at that RMS, which is a super bright green that you're going to see here. That bright green one is the important one. And I'm placing it a little below the kick. Sometimes you might be up there with it. Other times you might be a little lower. But you definitely want that RMS to be up there, because that RMS is a better indicator of how loud the bass sounds to the human ear. But also, and don't quote me on this, it's more of like experience thing here, but I could be wrong. A lot of times that is the low end energy. So with bass and kick, right? So if you have a kick that lacks bass, but it's very punchy, you will also sometimes see that that difference is a lot. Okay. Now from here, there are a few more things that you can do with the rolling bass, but I can safely say to you as a sound designer that does this for a living and has had his sounds used by Hardwell, Space 92, and a lot of the top techno producers out there, is that when it comes to bass, usually you will be using a saw and a square as the main bass lines for techno, tech house, lots of dance music, melodic house, progressive house. It's usually going to be one of those. So saw and square. Now what changes? Why do you see sometimes people using different forms? Well, like I said before, there are various different synths out there, right? You know, you guys know like Moog synths, Prophet synths, Dave Smith, Udo Audio, you know, like the Novation, right? They all have a different tone to them. So in Ableton, when you click here, if you can find other saws, they will all have different tones to them, different feels to them that you can choose to use, okay? And then from here, we'll move on to a little bit more advanced stuff, okay? So saw or square. Okay, now the square, a lot heavier. Okay. Or you go with a saw, which is a little bit more classier. I would say square is Nadal, saw is Federer. No right or wrong. What do you like? I like gritty, but sometimes a saw is a better choice for the song. The other thing you can do is add resonance. Okay, now resonance is going to be the volume at which the frequency cutoff point is at. So higher resonance will produce a squelch-like sound. Okay. So if you want that, then you can add it. You can also increase more of the mids with it if you don't go at very high values. From there, right here in Ableton, we can click and we can find different variations to the filter, because remember, tone is important when it comes to sound design. It's a little attention to detail stuff. So there's various different algorithms for the filters. As you can see, that one already sounds totally different. If I switch it to SMP, oh God, nope, clean, OSR. As you do that, you're gonna notice too that there's a dry feature that occurs down here, which the best way to think about this is the sound source is rerouted back into itself to produce an overdrive effect. So it just saturates more because you're feeding more of the volume into itself. So you can add more volume and saturation to the bass, making it less pointy, less clicky, and more fuller and fatter. So we're gonna do that. And again, you can also route your envelope 2 to it if you choose to in the matrix, right? Where all our modulations occur. I can click on anything here and it will pop up there. So if I wanted to, I could do that and make it sound even fuller. But again, be careful. In this example, it worked out pretty good, but sometimes it might not, so just be careful with it. All right, cool. Now, effects, right? When it comes to rolling bass lines, effects that you can add are obviously going to be echoes, right? Reverb if you choose to. You can add chorus, but what you have to keep in mind is if the rolling bass is going to be the foundation of your low end, a lot of the times you have to be really careful when you add these effects, and you have to be mindful as you add them. You know, you don't want to be just rolling like a gun, just like, wow, bam, putting shit. It sounds fine, because then you're going to end up with a mess. This is where most people fuck up, and this is where the terminology comes, do less with more, right? However, to show you how I would program, you know, a delay to this bass or a reverb, first, I want to use a return track. So I can control click here, and I'm going to insert a return track. Okay, I'm going to add a delay, an echo in there, but you can use any delay you want. But the number one rule I have for you, okay, because you're my student and we're going to take over together, or at least you make a banger and play it out, but you want to put this above 150 and you don't want there to be low end. So now we're going to route it. From there, take your time picking your settings here. And think about your stereo image, right? So this rolling bass is down the center. If I want to create width with it, then I would either use a ping pong or use this feature here and add a bit of a percentage change. All right, so again, you got to be careful with this. It can fuck shit up. Let's unlink, try notes, 16s. Okay, we created some width. We can ping pong it. And we can add some reverb. Lower decay time of that reverb, how long it's going to last. Okay. There we go. Not that glorious. Lower the amount. Increase the amount just to hear the effect more. That reverb's not our friend. And we get that. So it's fair to add delay if you want to the bass. There's nothing really wrong with it. You can add it on top of it if you want. Right, like 1/8, 1/8. But I'll tell you this right now. Most of the professional tracks I hear, they do not sound like this. So I usually don't encourage adding delay to it. Now, if you wanted to create a wide layer for this bass, or you wanted more advanced sounding bass, like you're like, I like the saw, but everyone has a fucking saw, then what I would do is duplicate the patch, right? So this is our bottom one, and this is our top bass. And in the top bass, I have a couple of options, okay? First one is that I can switch the wave now to a wave that is different, like this one, and start moving through it to find a different tone. And, you know, I want to add the removal of low end, because again, you cannot have two bass lines playing low end together. They will phase out. They will fight each other to the death for your attention. And that's not what we want. So we command click both. And this top bass will dictate the tone of it. Will come. Now this top one is going to control. Now if I want to widen it, I can add unison. Classic mode. 2 voices. We need more than 1 voice in order to get stereo. And then this amount is the detunement. If you want to detune it, give it this phasey feel, you can do that here. And we get this. Now, you have to worry about this guy, right? In terms of its shape with the filter and its amplitude as well. So in the amplitude, we can lower that down. And we can make that a little tighter. Or we can increase it. It's really up to you how you envision this. But you can have a lot of fun with it. Okay, this is simplest form here of like proper, EQing and stuff. But as a sound designer, there's been sound designers that have came before me that have been amazing, right? The rolling guy, I forget his name, went on to create Omnisphere, Spectrasonics, and there was also Rob Poppin, who created a lot of iconic presets for the Virus synthesizers, which are synthesizers from back in the day that were just insane. And one of the theories that I learned from Rob Poppin himself, he has a book on sound design, was when it comes to bass, only one wave should be down there at the meat. And your top bass should be up an octave from it. Now, if you're cutting out like this, then you are fine, right? Because his theory is in the foundation of if we're using a synthesizer, right, and we were doing it all in the synth, then yeah, you can't have them there. But if you can cut the low end, that's fine. But let's say you want to follow that theory, then what you want to do, and here I have this pitch MIDI effect from Ableton that I'm just going to put to -12. This will be on top, an octave above this rolling bass. Now we get a different tone, right? Now in this scenario, you can be a little less strict about this. Main reason is that the low end, the meat of the sound isn't in the low end region anymore. It's going to be more up here. Okay, but the problem with this is that sometimes you can get an overload of that frequency here. So with this guy, you can choose an EQ and cut everything like so, or you can do it the way I do it, the sound designer way, not the mixing way, and just lower down the filter frequency amount that you're opening up the filter by. Okay. And on this guy, I'm gonna add delay. I'm gonna distort the crap out. No, I'm just gonna have fun, like use effects, try adding stuff to it that you feel might sound good. And on this guy, you don't really have to sidechain it as much. If you like the pump effect, then do leave it. But if you don't, you can leave it as so if you want. Now, I know things are getting advanced here and the rabbit hole goes deeper, which I'll save for another video. So as a sound designer, I grant you an imaginary diploma that states that you are now an intermediate at rolling bass lines. But take your time with it, guys. Rolling bass lines, while simple in nature, are very finicky, especially as you try to take them to the next level. I've hired sound designers to help me out with some of the packs that I make for you guys. And it's funny because, I'll hire drum and bass, like dubstep sound designers. And I'm like, this be easy for them. And yeah, they'll deliver rolling bass lines, but not at the level that I would put my stamp of approval. Because as you guys saw, they're very finicky. And when it comes to them, they should sound just good, because when producers use sounds, they should sound great from the get-go. And when you make your sounds for your music, they should also sound about 90% of the way there. If they don't fall into the mixing trap, fix it at the source. You record a vocalist that sounds really not the best day. You get a better recording instead of trying to turn poop into gold. Okay? You want to turn silver into gold, or whatever gold is made out of. You want to dig it. Yeah. With that being said, if you guys want to support the channel, you can head over to evilsounds.com, where you can find all of my sound design work. And you guys have a great rest of your day.